Let's turn our attention to the branch of economics that deals a little bit more on the human behavior side, and that's going to be with behavioral economics. We hit the sociological and psychological part of economics a little bit more under this branch of economics. It's a study of how human psychology enters into economic behavior as a way to explain why individuals sometimes act in predictable ways counter to economic models. And in all the models that we've worked with so far, we've assumed that every single individual was rational, would always make the best decisions for themselves. However, in the real world, we realize that people are not very rational in a lot of different cases. So behavioral economics tries to get a closer idea of why humans may act irrationally, but they're going to act irrationally in very predictable manners. And there are 5 sort of factors that are going to be affecting the psychological sort of branch of economics, and we take a look at them right here. The sunk cost fallacy, the framing bias, overconfidence, overvaluing the present relative to the future, and altruism. So all of these are different reasons why we as individuals may act irrationally in very, very predictable manners. So take a look at the sunk cost fallacy first. So what exactly is a sunk cost? We'll go ahead and build this up for every single one of these factors right here. So here, take a look at the sunk cost. So a sunk cost is something that has already been paid and cannot be recovered at all. So a cost that has been paid, and cannot be recovered, And a lot of these times, whenever we make a decision for ourselves, we are including the sunk cost into our decision making. However, it should not come into our decision making at all because we are never going to be able to recover the cost with the sunk cost. And the example that they provide you here on the slides is deciding whether or not to drop a class because tuition is already paid. So suppose that we're halfway in the semester and you've already paid for all your classes and you're debating whether or not you want to drop one particular class. What are factors that should come into your sort of decision making on whether or not you would go ahead and drop the class? It should be whether or not you're doing well in the class, whether or not you have other obligations. However, should the tuition be a factor in your decision? And the answer in this case is it should not be, even though you may want it to be. So the reason why tuition should not come into your decision making at all, because it is already a sunk cost. You've paid your dues, you paid your tuition to the university, and you're never going to be able to recover that at all. So because you cannot recover it, it's paid in the past, it should not come into your decision making in any of these instances. So this is something that happens quite often in a lot of things and a lot of actions that we do in real life. We also see this, say, in your relationships as well. Suppose that you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and you've invested all this time, all this effort into making the relationship work. However, suppose that your partner decides to cheat on you. What should you do with him or her? In this instance, do you really care about all the time and effort that you put into the relationship to make it work? And the answer is you probably should not, because all of that time, all of that effort is seen as a sunk cost. So therefore, all the time you've spent in the past, all the effort you've put into the relationship, it should not come into your decision on whether or not you should be breaking up with him or her at all. So sunk cost fallacy in an application as well. And one really good area where we do see a lot of sunk costs coming into play is with sports contracts. So we do notice that a lot of sports teams, they offer these players huge sports contracts, and the sports contracts are pretty much guaranteed money. However, what happens if the player does not live up to their expectations? Should that come into the manager's decision on whether or not they should be playing the player or benching him? And the answer is no, because remember, the contract itself is going to be seen as a sunk cost. It's already paid. It's guaranteed money for the player. And have you ever wondered who is the highest sports player paid today? So we can go ahead and take a closer look at this one, the list of the largest sports contracts. And not surprisingly, you're going to see that the vast majority of people that play baseball, they have the largest sports contracts because there is no salary cap in baseball. So the highest paid player nowadays is Mike Trout. He has roughly $33 million per year, a $35 million per year baseball contract. And what would happen if Mike Trout doesn't live up to his expectations? Should that come into the manager's decision on whether or not he should be playing? And the answer is no. It should only come into account of how good he is for the team, exactly what he's doing at that current moment. Is he nursing an injury? So this money that we've all paid to all these players right here, it should not come into the decision making on whether the player should play or not. So as you can see right here, Canelo Alvarez, He's the next highest paid player. But a lot of baseball, Giancarlo Stanton used to be a highest paid baseball player, formerly of the Miami Marlins, now with the Yankees. But as you can see right here, a lot of baseball players have a very, very large sports contract, essentially because there is no salary cap. But we do see other sports coming into play as well. So here, basketball, baseball, American football, so Matt Ryan, the poor Atlanta Falcons. But as you can actually see right here, this is going to be where a lot of sunk costs come into play as well. Another area or another factor that we can go ahead and take a look at is going to be a framing bias. These are techniques used to steer individuals into making one decision over another. And another way to frame the framing bias, as we sort of can say right here, is that the same information is presented to you just in a slightly different manner. So here, take a look at the framing bias. And once again, these are all going to be sort of factors that sort of show why individuals act irrationally. So the framing bias convinces individuals they are receiving a higher value. They are receiving a higher value for a product than what was paid for it. For a product than what was paid for it. And what was paid for it. So once again, just the same amount of information being presented to you, just slightly presented to you in a slightly different manner. Framing bias convinces individuals they are receiving a higher value for a product than what was paid for it. So take these two examples right here. Buy one, get one 50% off versus $25% off of your entire purchase. Both of these essentially mean the same thing for us, but which one of these is going to be designed to get you to spend a little bit more? It's probably going to be buy one, get one 50% off. That's going to be designed, it's ingrained in your mind just a little bit that you are going to get a better deal if you buy one, buy another one for 50% off rather than getting 25% off of your entire purchase. Same thing with gasoline, the price of gasoline. $2.999 per gallon versus $3 per gallon of gasoline. Essentially, these two values are exactly the same thing, but which one do you think you're going to be getting a better deal on? It's probably going to be this $2.99 because you think you're getting it for $2.99, rather, although it's as close as it can be to $3 per gallon. Another example of this, suppose that you are in the hospital and the doctor's talking to you. Would you rather have the doctor say you have a 90% chance of living or you have a 10% chance of dying? In this instance, you probably want to hear that you have a 90% chance of living rather than a 10% chance of dying. No one really wants to hear about dying in a hospital. So once again, this is the framing bias sort of in application. Third factor is going to be overconfidence. And overconfidence is exactly that. You are overconfident in your own abilities. What you believe about yourself is greater than the objective sort of measurements of that particular argument. So here, overconfidence. Overconfidence. With overconfidence, a person's subjective confidence, so a person's subjective confidence in his judgments is greater than the objective accuracy. Let me erase this. So a person's subjective confidence in his judgments is greater than the objective accuracy of those judgments. So as you can see right here, basically what you believe about yourself, your own subjective feelings about yourself, is not as good as what is objectively seen. And as you saw on that slide right there, the best example is going to be New Year's resolutions. So everyone comes into the new year thinking that it's going to be the best year ever. They say they're going to lose weight. They sign up for a gym membership. They follow through for a month. And then what happens in February? The gym essentially becomes a ghost town and they don't follow through. So you feel good about yourself in January, but come February, it doesn't really match up with what you believed about yourself. We also see overconfidence in a lot of reality television shows, especially competition shows. So America's Got Talent, American Idol. What do we always see in one of these reality shows? We always say that, hey, we see a person saying, hey, I'm the best singer around, I'm the best actor around, and I'm going to go straight to Hollywood and win the entire competition. But the moment that they open their mouths, what happens? They are very, very terrible. They have a terrible voice, and basically we see overconfidence coming into play once again. Next factor we can take a look at is overvaluing the present relative to the future. And like the name implies, you just care a little bit more about the current time period rather than the future. And this can lead to a lot of irrational type of actions made today. So here, overvaluing the present relative to the future. Relative to the future. And that just tells you that you care a little bit more about the current time period rather than the future. So caring too much about the present, so the present time period, without making plans for the future. Without making plans for the future. The future. And if this is going to be the case, this particular factor just tells us that, hey, if you care too much about the current time period, you are going to basically consume like you have no future at all. But when the future actually comes, you're going to be put in a very, very bad position. And the example that they provide to you into the slides is saving for retirement. The savings right here in the United States is pretty abysmal. The vast majority of Americans have not saved anything for retirement, either because they can't or they really don't care about the future. So they're basically focusing in on right now. But when it comes time when they're older and they have to retire, they are put in a very, very precarious situation because they haven't saved enough, and basically they're going to pretty much live in a box out in the street, or they're going to have to keep on working. They have no retirement at all. So once again, going to be a very, very difficult thing and lead to a lot of bad decisions today. Final factor we can go ahead and take a look at is going to be altruism. And altruism are actions undertaken merely out of goodwill or generosity. And here, take a look at the final factor with altruism. Altruism says actions undertaken, these are actions undertaken merely out of goodwill, or generosity, So essentially here, remember that we work with the assumption that individuals within economics are seen as very, very selfish. They should only care about themselves. But what do we see in the real world? We notice that a lot of people are altruistic. They undertake a particular action basically because it's out of their own goodwill or their own generosity. So exactly the opposite of what we built up so far. An altruism example we can give of this is, why do people leave generous tips if it does not affect the quality of service already provided? So suppose that you get terrible service within a restaurant, or the server is just rude to you. Why would you still be inclined to give this particular server a tip, even if you may never come back to this particular restaurant? And that's going to be out of your own goodwill, out of your own generosity, because you know exactly what it feels like to go ahead and be a waitress or a waiter, and you know that they're getting paid below minimum wage and they live off of their tip. So if you don't tip the particular waitress or waiter, then basically they have lost out on a lot of money and they can't survive on that low amount of wages. Other examples is, suppose there is going to be some type of disaster that happens around the world. Why may you go ahead and donate to a particular disaster that you are not particularly affected by or know anyone that's going to be affected by? Once again, we hit on this idea of altruism. People in the real world actually do care about other people, and not the sort of things that we sort of built up in economics where people are very, very selfish. So as we've seen with these 5 factors right here, these are all reasons why individuals may act irrationally in the real world, and that's exactly what behavioral economics tries to get into just a little bit more. And you can spend an entire semester on behavioral economics. I'm not sure if we offer any classes on that here, but if this is the sort of thing that interested you, you can go ahead and take a closer look at it, because it deals a little bit more on the psychological and sociological side of economics and exactly how humans behave a little bit more in depth. So altruism, overvaluing the present relative to the future, overconfidence, the framing bias, and sunk cost, the sort of 5 factors or 5 psychological factors that influence economic behavior and fall under the branch of behavioral economics.